Welcome to account-based, actually, it's go-to-market Friday. There's my first live mistake of the day. Welcome to our weekly conversation where we talk all things go-to-market. Today, we've got a special guest and my co-host, Meg Heuer and I, who have done over 300 of these videos. The special guest is actually going to be Meg and I. We're going to be co-hosting the conversation around Claude Cowork today and really digging into Claude Cowork as a game changer for sales and marketing. I think we've been investigating it and using it in prospective situations as well as with client situations. It's only an 8-week-old tool, so it hasn't been out there for all that long, but we'll share a couple lessons learned that may be valuable as part of this. And, I just want to thank and acknowledge Meg again. We've been doing this for, 3 or 4 years now. And Meg, I appreciate your making the time to have today's conversation on Claude Cowork.
I'm excited. I think we're finally seeing, like, as you mentioned in kind of the description of today's event, we're past experimentation. Now it's really about how do you unlock the productivity opportunity that tools like Claude Cowork represent, and all of the things that we'd love not to have on our plates are finally, seeing the real and legitimate opportunity to be moved off of our plates to make room for other things. And I think, you sharing some of the things that you've worked out with Claude Cowork that have been, I think, really helpful for you personally, but just also in general, I think use cases for the go-to-market audience. This is a good moment to reflect on the ways that your day could look different if only you had a working knowledge of some of these tools. And like you said, the tool's only been around for 8 weeks. So it's hard to have lots of experts on it in 8 weeks. So I appreciate the time that you in particular have put in to kind of test it and hammer on it and learn from it. And that's, I think why I'm excited for us to share the content today. So I will turn it over to you to give us kind of a core definition of what is Claude Cowork.
Yeah, absolutely. And just some context too. So I just gave this class to 100 people in Pavilion on Claude Cowork and went through a couple different go-to-market use cases. For those not familiar, Pavilion's really great at aggregating a sales and marketing audience. So we talked a lot about Cowork and its applicability to different use cases. But to your point, what I discovered in that audience is there's a lot of foundational things that are missing. And I'm a little bit spoiled. I think I've shared this with a lot of people before, but I was an early adopter. This is my Pixel 9 phone. I am a technophobe or techno geek or whatever you call that. I adopted the Pixel 9 very early for our business on AI when it first came out about 1.5 years ago. And I've been knee deep in a variety of different tools. Was not knee deep in Claude at all. In fact, I was starting to bifurcate across Gemini, which is the Google product, and some of their related products, Notebook LM, as well as ChatGPT. I was really deep on both of those. I had heard early on that a key contact of mine said, "Hey, you really got to look at this Claude Cowork because it's pretty significant." And when I started looking at it, I could right away see the applicability to go-to-market. And it's a lot different than the normal AI. So normal AI is kind of ping pong. You ask a question, you get an answer. You ask ChatGPT a question, you get an answer. Ping pong, back and forth and back and forth. And it can be a little bit exhausting because you have to keep on asking it questions and it keeps on giving you answers. What's different about Claude Cowork? Claude has their own ping pong capability in their regular core product, but with Cowork, it's a different way of thinking. It's almost like a delegation where you can delegate tasks for it to go do and complete around the parameters you give it and then come back. So you could take a walk around the block and say, "Hey, do this research. While I'm walking around the block, I want you to do this research on this account. And tell me, everything about this account that you can find on the web or perhaps on data that you upload to it." It's incredibly powerful in that regard. So it's a lot different than the ping-ponging back and forth. Before I go into more of the definition, let me pause there and see, does that resonate from what you've heard or seen or experienced yourself?
Yeah, absolutely. Because I think that, a lot of us have gotten comfortable with some basic tasks in AI and even some kind of complicated tasks in AI. And I think you can't open anything, or look at anything without seeing, the word agent pop up, and thinking about what agents can do for you. And I think that ping pong analogy is a really good one. And the better you get at the ping pong and encouraging the answers you want, sort of the more helpful they become. I am a user of Claude and I also kind of go back and forth. I'm funny, not a big user of ChatGPT, but I do use both Gemini and Claude. And sometimes I'll sort of pit them against each other on the same project just to see. And I usually find that some combination of the two is what I'm looking for. Um, but that's, but as you say, it's been primarily in that ping pong world that I'm using those tools. So I think taking that next step, like you said, to saying, how do we delegate to this resource? And that's exciting because that also takes some of the onus off of the person who has to participate in the ping pong, assuming, and this is what I think, we're going to get into today, you're setting up that delegation in a way that's going to get you the output that you want, that's accurate and useful.
Well, yeah, and you bring up a really good point. That's actually a use case that you could use with Claude Cowork, and one that I've done where I can compare the outputs of ChatGPT, Gemini, and Claude. I'm not surprised that you've kind of oriented toward Claude, given if memory serves, you've got kind of an English language background for your
English major,
undergrad.
undergrad at UConn.
There you go. So, and Claude is much better, in my opinion, at English. So perhaps you've gravitated within the last, and this is the challenge with all these tools. It's so hard to keep up, and nobody's got the time to deal with them. Within the last 48 to 72 hours, Claude has come out with, and I'll post it in the show notes afterward, the ability to move from ChatGPT and all the memory that you might have there over into Claude. So for those users that are deep into ChatGPT, you can bring it over into Claude pretty easily, and that's a newer capability. Going back though to the definition, I'll show you a couple prompts from a PowerPoint which Claude Cowork created on my behalf. So it was another use case of Claude Cowork of creating something output wise. In this case, it was PowerPoint branded in the way and styled the way I wanted it, which is pretty amazing. So we'll get to that in a moment, but foundationally, I think it's important to kind of emphasize a couple things. First of all, in my experience, because I've got an M1 Mac at home, Claude Cowork is really designed to work in that environment with an M chip for Mac. So if you got an older Mac, it might work, it might not work. If you have Windows, they have the Windows announcement. All the people that I know that have a Windows platform with Claude Cowork are having a frustrating experience. They're filing trouble tickets. Their experience has not been the best. So unfortunately, platform-wise, it really works best on a Mac, which not a lot of people have. The other interesting thing is it produces something called an artifact or a markdown file, an MD file. Now, these MD files can be used across any AI system or LLM. So you can take the output and drag it into ChatGPT or into Gemini. In fact, I've done that several times because I found more value in some of the other LLMs than I have in Claude itself in giving me an answer. So that's an interesting architectural thing that they've done as part of that. So even though you could have one user that has a Mac, you could create what's called a skill or a markdown file, and you can port that across whatever else your company's using. We're in early days of Claude Cowork, and there's some language around the ability to log activity. It's not enterprise grade yet. It doesn't have the capability to do some of the logging that some of the other LLMs might have from their enterprise platforms, in particular, like a Microsoft Copilot. So it doesn't surprise me that a lot of people haven't, gone whole hog and adopting this yet, because if you're in a regulated environment, if you're dealing with financials, pharmaceuticals, healthcare, it's likely you're not going to be able to use this very aggressively or at scale. So it's going to work for certain segments of the market really well, like tech, or where there might be some looseness around the interpretation of data. So that's just some background of things that I've kind of learned along the way, um, as part of the whole platform of Cowork.
Yeah, and I think that security, notion is, I think, really important to keep in mind. What you share can be in the public domain, and we're putting a lot of trust in systems that haven't been around very long and don't have a lot of guardrails. And if you are, even if you're not in a regulated environment, I mean, just thinking about what you wish to share of your personal information, it's a personal choice. But I think we all have to be very conscious of the risks, and I think it's just as important to stay up on security and privacy concerns and regulations and requirements, and risks, as it is to stay up on the effectiveness of the tools. These things go hand in hand, and they're going to evolve together, and we're going to see some bad things. We're also going to see some really good things. I think the question is, are you making an assumption of safety that's not really the case? So I would just encourage people to really stay informed about the ways that their data that they are sharing might make it to places they don't want it to go.
Yeah, we've had some instances where I've talked to prospects on this because it's so new that they're stripping out the PII and then they're using Claude Cowork. So that could be another way. So you could use the metadata inside it. What Claude Cowork does particularly well is extract trends and analysis. So if you think about your transcripts, your written notes, your spoken notes, like a pile of data, it can organize really, really well. The example that I used in this class that I just gave to 100 people was LinkedIn. We're all on LinkedIn for sales and marketers, or at least I think a majority of us are. And you can do a data download. And in that data download, you're going to get 100, I don't know the exact number. I'm making a number up, but let's call it 100 different CSVs of your likes, your posts, your connections, any activity that you've done on LinkedIn, you can download. And if we get time, I'll show you some of the output on that. But then I had Claude Cowork by a series of prompts, and I'll show you kind of what works well for best practice prompts. Through some prompting, it gave me the right information very quickly and gave me insights to my data that I didn't even think about. And so the lesson learned on that to build confidence is start with data that that you can kind of call BS on to say, hey, is this thing working or is it not? I find that it gets you very deep into the quadrant in terms of accuracy. It's not 100%. Definitely is not 100%, but it gets you really, really deep. And in the case of my LinkedIn analysis, and Meg, you've got a bunch of followers too. I think I'm up to like a little over 10,000 now. I've been on LinkedIn for 20 something years. So I'm thinking this system's not going to tell me something I don't already know. Like there's no way it's going to tell me something I don't already know. And I was blown away, but it ended up producing a 38-page document and doing not only the analysis, but the correlation across the different categories on things that I wouldn't ordinarily think about. And so it was very enlightening. And that's what Claude Cowork really does, is it takes a pile of data and makes sense of it very easily.
Well, and I think that's just a reminder too that there's really no excuse to make assumptions independent of data right now. If you have meaningful data, if you have data that can even show directional trends, you're better off taking a look at it. I think we've all been surprised by findings from primary data and the review of primary data. In the past, it took a long time. It usually required specialized skill sets and wasn't accessible. Now it is. So, that's something that we all now have a responsibility to do, is not assume, but really go to the data. But like you said, I think the other challenge is if you are doing analysis of data that you are completely unfamiliar with and wouldn't know to spot if something looks a little bit off, there's risk. So this is, back to the risk profile and what you're willing to accept and what you're comfortable, without not being able to spot check if you don't really have that knowledge yourself. But I like your idea of starting with something where you could look at it and say, does that seem like an answer that I would expect? And then I think the other kind of safeguard there is, if you do see something that's unexpected, dig in. See, wow, is that accurate? If let's find out and learn from it. I think this is where, keeping your curiosity on high alert is kind of your best defense against things that aren't accurate. If it looks too good or too bad to be true, or just plain off, go dig in.
Yeah, it's pretty interesting. The other thing I should also mention, Claude Cowork is like Swiss Army knife in terms of capability. It's got so many capabilities. In the remaining 12 minutes, I couldn't even cover all the capabilities. One of the capabilities is it helped build software for me that was really the backbone of sales battle cards. So it can build just about anything and absorb information from signals on the web, account research, any kind of transcripts, competitive information. It can not only assemble it, but it can assemble it in a way that's digestible elsewhere. So I began building dashboards with software. So the analogy I was using with somebody the other day was, everybody seems to know how to do marketing other than marketers. Everybody's an expert at marketing. Well, now everybody's becoming an expert at coding. So here I am on the weekend coding this software and dashboard that you wouldn't be able to do ordinarily unless you studied that skill set. Now it's just speaking the English language of what the outcome is that you want, or showing a picture of what it is that you want, and it does all the design work for you. So that's a pretty big leap. And it felt empowering for me, who's never written code, to say, hey, I just built a software product that is usable. So that's another Cowork example. But let me pull up what I shared with the class of 100 people on Cowork, because we just went through this, and we're not going to have time to go through all the aspects here, because we've got about 10 minutes left. But I do want to mention, I want to kind of orient people around what Cowork looks like. And I'll try to blow this picture up a little bit here, so that way you can kind of see a little bit better without the language. Let me put it in presentation mode here so we can maximize. But this is the actual Cowork experience. And you can see that I've circled here. The ping pong that we talked about earlier, Meg, is on the left side, the chat. So you have the ability to chat on this. Cowork is in the middle, and then code, which I'm told is pretty easy to do. I've not really navigated deep at all into code, but that gives you the option to. I'm on the max plan just because I wanted to kind of roll around with it a little bit. There are cheaper plans. So this is the $200 a month plan. And the reason I did that was I was developing the software, so I wanted to not run out of what's called tokens. There are $20 a month plans and $100 a month plans as well. So you could easily have a lot less on this. And you can see over here, which is not circled, Opus 4.6. You could downgrade this to Sonnet. I think it's Sonnet 4.6, and use fewer tokens against your plan and get about the same quality. So there's some tricks of the trade here that you can get a little bit more mileage out of your your subscription. And then in this big circle here, Meg, is really the brains behind this. You can add files. You can include projects, and projects are almost a way to organize a lot of your information, because one of the challenges with Cowork is it forgets from task to task, whereas you can kind of keep things in a project on an ongoing basis. You can also access a folder, which is on this side. So I'll show you in a moment the different ways that you can access it. I only give it access to my downloads folder because I don't want to give it public access to everything. I think it's a security risk. I want to try it out with downloads. You can also connect it to a variety of different software programs that we use and go to market. So if you're running your business off Google like we do, so your G Suite could be connected to it, your email, your calendar, your Google Drive. If you're not doing that, you can run a Slack off of this on the connection. You can run Snowflake, Databricks. There's a number of different connectors that you can connect and do analysis on. Plugins, in a short way of describing plugins really automate a number of tasks for you to go execute on. And I have found a lot of value in the marketing plugins. However, the variety there's a large variety of quality between the highest to the lowest in my experimentation so far. So you got to kind of go in with eyes open on the plugins. But that's kind of like the lay of the land. Here's where you would prompt it. So it's not like a normal ping pong. This is more about asking it a strategic question or asking it to do analysis. It's almost like having a business analyst in your back pocket. And that's where you would kind of prompt it. Maybe before I go on and show you the different ways that it can access other information, Meg, since some of this may or may not be new to you, any thoughts or questions that come up on this?
No, I think I would love for you to walk through a couple of the use cases that you found meaningful, because I think, like you said, it's got the same challenge as other tools that you can use to do a whole lot of things with, which is it really only comes to life when you put them to use. And it only becomes, I think, easy for people to digest and go in and start to imagine how they might use it when you see examples. So I'm keen to see some examples.
Yeah, I'll show some examples, and I'll hop. Do you see the slide how Claude Cowork primarily does analysis?
Yes. Mm-hmm.
Okay, I'm going to skip over this because we only have about 5 minutes of time. I'm going to skip over how to prompt properly. We'll talk about use cases in the remaining couple minutes here. These are just some sample ideas of how to think about use cases. And the use case that I came up with was with LinkedIn to start. Now, there's a variety of different use cases that you can use. You could, you could create endless amount of content, have it posted into LinkedIn, create carousels. You could have account research being done. The one that I took was LinkedIn, and I dove a little bit deeper on LinkedIn. So the questions that I hear my prospects coming up with are kind of these questions. Are people wasting their time with LinkedIn? Like, we're posting all this information out there. How do we know if it's actually working? And Cowork can stitch together your company data as well as your personal data to help answer that question. CEOs asking, hey, we're doing all this activity. Is it showing pipeline? You can bump that up against your Salesforce data and see the correlations. You could dig into the outreach within LinkedIn to see if it's actually working. And I was amazed when I did that with my own analysis. I looked at, I created an ICP with Claude Cowork. I created it from my LinkedIn data. Then I looked at the quality of the connections in terms of how I was communicating to that person. Now, that's not normally something I would think about. It was something that it presented to me of, did you know that within your ICP, you're averaging X number of messages going back and forth versus your non-ICP where you're going Y number? And it was very telling, like, where do I spend my time? Do I spend it with the ICP or do I spend it with a non-ICP? Are we attracting the right followers on LinkedIn? What content is or is not resonating? Now, I will say that on the LinkedIn corporate pages, there's a lot less data to work with, at least for my company. I've got about 1,000 followers on my LinkedIn corporate page. I suspect, though, and I haven't battle tested this yet, but I will soon, there's other data that could be gleaned and downloaded if you're running strong campaigns on LinkedIn that you should be able to download and do analysis on. Anything that's Excel or CSV in nature could do this. So, and you could do this a bunch of different ways. You could run it for yourself. You could run it on behalf of your SDRs. There's a number of different ways that you can do this analysis. So I'm bit diving into one use case, which is LinkedIn, just to show you that the types of questions that it can ask. Beyond that one use case, there's infinite number of other sales and marketing use cases that you could use. But maybe before I go a little bit further, because we're getting close to time, Meg, what questions do you have coming out of this?
No, I think just keep going. Let's see a little bit more.
Yeah. So why don't we talk about prompts here in the remaining minute or two, because that's foundational to kind of thinking about how to build the right way to get this information in your use case, because literally the use cases are endless. And I'm doing a lot of analysis now, competitive wise, for a couple of my clients. But the right way to think about this is kind of in a 4-bucket strategy. So bucket one is, what is it that you have in terms of your files or your information? 2, what are the tasks? Like, what is it that you're asking it to do? So in the case, and I'll show you what this looks like with LinkedIn so you get an idea. 3, what the output is. Do you want a PDF? Do you want an Excel file? Do you want PowerPoint? Meg, the quality of the output has been so good. My outsourced resource that I have had for the last 6 years, unfortunately, I paused them because all the instructions I was giving to that outsourced resource, I can have Claude Cowork now do. So it's saving me cost elsewhere. That's how good the output has become. And then the constraints, any rules. Now I go one step further, and I also ask it the question, what else should I be thinking about that I have not included here? And what that does is it puts the onus back on the LLM to address any blind spots that I might have had in the data. So let me show you what this looks like populated in our remaining minute or so. This is how I populated my LinkedIn request. And there's a lot of text here, but I'll basically summarize. The context was, I downloaded all my files onto my local drive. I wanted meaningful trends and insights. So a very basic prompt. I wasn't looking for anything in particular, but look at this next thing here, Meg, where I say focus on segmentation, content engagement trends, what works, what doesn't. You can now segment your data in an infinite number of ways if you ask it the right questions. And that's part of the 38-page output that I got, was it did slice and dice that quite a bit. I wanted, I should have said I wanted a PDF or a PowerPoint. It delivered in a PowerPoint, and it was branded in this case, you're seeing some of the output here as part of the use case. It created all of this. And then you could see in my constraints, I asked the question, what else have I missed here? And that kind of mops up anything that might be outstanding. So that's kind of the structure that I would suggest. I know we're close to time here, but Meg, what questions come out of this as I'm going through this?
Yeah, I really like this framework for a way to break down the thing that you're asking about into component parts. But I also really like that you've added asking, for feedback on how you did. And I would say for every one of these, right, going back and saying, what else could I do? What would I miss? What would improve this? I do that with my regular prompts anyway, just to see what I missed. And I'm always reminded that there are capabilities I don't know about. That if I hadn't asked that question, I wouldn't have known. I just wouldn't have had them. So I think it's really helpful to have, that mindset of, I'm going to put in what I think will work, and then I'm going to ask it to be made better. And invariably, you're going to learn something. But I love how you've broken it down into component parts. And then you can also think about, oh, gee, what are the variations on the theme? Would something else work better here? So it gives you, it sort of bakes curiosity into your workflow. When a lot of times, if we're asking somebody else to do it, we may assume that we have to have all the answers because they won't. Well, in this case, you don't have to have all the answers. You just need to know the ballpark,
Exactly.
kind of get in the right neighborhood, and then start asking more questions to narrow it down and find out the things you didn't know.
And I've been pleasantly surprised. Sometimes I think I know in my mind what it is I want from output. And I asked that question, and it comes back with a series of questions. I'm like, gosh, that's right. I didn't put that assumption in, or it's a really good jogger of memory, and to get the things that are in your head out on paper. Now, there are other technologies that can take voice commands, which Claude does have voice capability. I've tested it a little bit. I haven't used it, but I have heard people using voice get even a richer experience. So that'll probably be the next foray for me, is to experiment a little bit with the voice side of things. But I can't imagine the output's going to change dramatically differently. It might be a little bit differently. Yeah, we'll see how that goes. But that in a nutshell, in 30 minutes, we could spend hours and hours on this. And I'm continuing to bang on it because I think it's got a lot of promise, so much so that I'm seeing my company take a more active role in this area, because I think this is where the puck is headed for GTM, in the future.
Yeah, whether we like it or not, right? I think there's times are definitely changing rapidly, and I appreciate that you're putting in the effort that you are and the learning that you are, and I think it's really valuable for all of us to be able to learn from each other. So thank you for that.
Yeah, no, absolutely, absolutely, and yeah, we'll continue to do it. If you're a Pavilion member, we've been running weekly office hours, so on Claude Cowork for GTM, and I'm chairing that. So if you're a Pavilion member, ping me and I can include you in on that conversation, where we talk about more use cases and we go deep into what's working and what's not, because it's changing so quickly that it's behooves us to kind of stay in touch with one another. So yeah, that's the long and short of Claude and Cowork in 29 minutes or less.
All right. Well, thank you, John. Appreciate that. And we're looking forward to next week's guest, Kathleen Schaub, who's going to be talking with us about really kind of not maybe reinventing is the wrong word, but rethinking the way that we represent volatility and ambiguity and complexity in B2B marketing. I'm so excited to have her join us next week. She's really an expert on how to do that and how to have those hard executive conversations to help mindsets change away from sort of the factory view of things over more to the ecosystem view of things. So she's going to give us some tools to navigate complexity.
So critical right now with all this AI. So looking forward to having her back.
Absolutely.
Excellent. We'll see you next week.
Happy Friday.